Hello to all and welcome. In this video, I'm going to talk about the cooperative principles, or more widely, the universal cooperative standards that are enshrined in the Statement on the Cooperative Identity, and which contains a definition, 7 operational principles, and 10 underlying values, and how these standards are concretely lived and experienced in the case studies of the book Cooperativism at Work. I will also explain to you the emergence and evolution of these standards since the 17th century and the ongoing debate about maintaining them as such or modifying them. In the same YouTube channel as this video called Cooperativism at Work, like the book, you can find a general presentation about the book, which I edited and partly wrote, and has recently been published at Routledge. One striking common feature in the 26 case studies of the book is the worker owners' strong adherence to these cooperative universal standards. This can be observed through the book and through how they organize in the enterprise, express in the smaller interviews which many of the chapters contain. This adherence to the universal cooperative standards is not only ethical, it is actually existential, because these standards are what defines what a cooperative is and is not, and how it functions. Now, let's see what the key components of these universal cooperative standards are and how they're experienced by the worker owners in the cooperative described in the book. Cooperatives respond to ordinary people's socio-economic needs. Now, the key need which worker-owned cooperatives strive to meet is employment. That includes not only having a job, but also employment stability, a satisfactory level of social coverage, a high level of equality in the remuneration and employment status of the worker owners, and also upward mobility. All case studies of the book show very clearly the importance of this need for the worker owners. The needs which the cooperative tries to meet can also include other needs in the surrounding community, and that is particularly the case among social cooperatives, but not only. Also, worker cooperatives can often meet such needs in the community. Those needs can be in different possible fields, including health, education, the work integration of disadvantaged people, local development, the preservation of the environment, or even the need to be liberated from the dominance of the mafia, as shown very clearly in one of the case studies of the book. A second key component is that a cooperative is both an autonomous association of persons and an enterprise. This double nature of cooperatives, as it is called, is well illustrated in all 26 cases of the book. Another key component of the cooperative international standards is democratic control over the enterprise. The importance of this component can be seen very clearly and explicitly in all the 26 cases of the book. It expresses itself not only through the one person, one vote procedures, but also through an institutional architecture in the cooperative with checks and balances, consensus building methods, and even conflict resolution practices when conflict occurs. The worker owners know that they bear responsibility for their decisions, but also for how they implement those decisions. And indeed, worker-owned cooperatives are unique among cooperatives in that those who make decisions are also those that implement those decisions. Next, cooperatives lay a strong emphasis on education, training, and information, which are indeed essential elements to exercise democratic control. In the case of worker-owned cooperatives, this is particularly important, given that, as I just told you, the same people who exert democratic control in making decisions are the same people who will implement those decisions. The case studies of the book illustrate clearly how this operational principle is implemented in practice. It is also a fundamental principle to ensure upward mobility in the enterprise. In some case studies illustrated in the book, manual workers have been able to complete fully fledged university studies, for example, in enterprise management, all that financed by their own cooperative. Another component of the cooperative universal standards is the combination of individual and common property. On the one hand, we have the nominal financial participation, in this case, the worker owners, which gives to each individual worker owner his or her nominal share of property in the enterprise. And on the other hand, we have the gradual generation and development of common non-nominal property by earmarking part or all of the year-end results to common reserves, which can also be converted into tangible assets. The 26 case studies of the book clearly show this combination of individual and common property. Another component is the predominance of persons over capital, not only in the voting system through the one person, one vote procedure, independently of the amount of capital contributed by each member, but also through the surplus redistribution system. Redistribution, when it occurs, is done prevalently according to members' transaction with the cooperative. In this case, in members that are worker owners, these transactions have to do with remuneration. Cooperative members can also decide not to redistribute surpluses. In some cases, each worker owner of the cooperative receives the same amount in redistribution of year-end results, and in other cases, those with a higher remuneration or those who have worked more hours or both combined receive more. Another component is that entering a cooperative is free and voluntary. But in the case of worker members, logically, there must first be a workplace. Otherwise, they would not be worker members. The case studies of the book show that this is indeed the case. Next, cooperatives have the mission to cooperate among themselves. They do so through networks, agencies, financial instruments, groups, or representative associations. This cooperation among cooperatives can reinforce the grassroots cooperatives in their economic sustainability and in the co-creation of public policies and legislation for their promotion and sustainability. The 26 examples show this involvement in cooperation among cooperatives in different ways. Next, cooperatives are committed to the surrounding community and to sustainable development. Again, all 26 cases of the book reflect this dynamic in different manners. Then we have the 10 underlying values, which are listed on the screen, and which cooperative members abide by, and this can be verified again in the case studies of the book. The book also mentions the complementary world standards approved by the worker cooperative movement and the social cooperative movement. Among the most relevant one, I should mention one that in a worker cooperative, most workers should be members and vice versa, most members should be workers. And secondly, that in social cooperatives, the seventh cooperative principle of concern for the community is the paramount one. Now, how did all this come about? How did it emerge in history? In its first chapter, Cooperativism at Work shows the origin and evolution of the cooperative movement in general, but also the origin and the evolution of the common denominators that have gradually been elaborated among cooperatives and how worker cooperativism contributed to them. The predominant narrative says that the cooperative principles find their origin with a cooperative called the Equitable Pioneers of Routledge in 1844. But they are actually much older. The first historical evidence of rules for what we could call proto-cooperatives goes back to the middle of the 17th century with a Dutch social thinker called Workw, who spurred the creation of a cooperative community in what is today Delaware in the United States, and whose rules largely anticipate those of the Rochdale pioneers 2 centuries later. Now, Workw, in his works, hints at earlier experience in Central and Eastern Europe. So the origin of cooperatives and of the cooperative common denominators is probably even older than the 17th century. After Workw, other cooperative communities will be promoted by other social thinkers like Robert Owen in Britain and Charles Fourier in France. An interesting point is that all these early cooperative communities, inspired by Roy, Owen, or Fourier, already cooperativized labor, among other aspects of life. And so they already had a component of worker-owned cooperatives as far back as the 17th century. Then cooperatives started differentiating among themselves among different categories, like consumer cooperatives and worker cooperatives. In 1831, Philippe Boucher in France proposed 5 rules for worker cooperatives, or worker associations as they were called at that time. These rules partly anticipate, again, the Routledge ones over a decade later. We have historical evidence of worker cooperatives in France following these rules, beginning 3 years later in 1834. Then came the Equitable Pioneers of Rochdale, a consumer cooperative established in 1844 near Manchester. Their famous principles, or rules, or laws, as they were first called, were gradually formulated between 1844 and 1861. These rules were designed only for that particular cooperative, but the economic success of the Pioneers of Rochdale made it a model which was quickly studied and imitated by consumer cooperatives across Britain and abroad. What is less known is that these rules included a first one called Law the First, precisely because it was the first one, stating that workers should be included in the membership. This did not work out quite well for reasons that are explained in the book, but it became the object of a big debate of the 19th century in Britain and abroad, and then it was eclipsed. I will come back to this in a separate video on multi-stakeholder cooperativism. With the creation of the International Cooperative Alliance in 1895 and the consequent institutionalization of the international cooperative movement, the Rochdale Cooperative continued to be considered as a model. But one of ICA's fundamental missions at the time of its creation was to, and I quote, elucidate by international discussion and correspondence the nature of true cooperative principles, end quote. Which means that these principles were not fully elucidated yet. And it is only a few decades later, in the 1930s, that the ICA decided in one of its congresses to elucidate the cooperative principles and to work on their formulation and approval internationally. This exercise took 7 years of elaboration and consultation among ICA members, with the Rochdale Cooperative still being the main source of inspiration. Although the formulation, which was approved in 1937, clearly showed the dominance of consumer cooperatives within the ICA at the time, it was a very important step forward because it constituted the first ever official formulation and approval of international cooperative standards for cooperatives. As we know, the world then entered a critical period with Nazism, fascism, the Second World War, the Cold War, the rebuilding of a new world order with the United Nations, and decolonization, with dozens of new countries gaining independence. This also meant that many new national organizations of cooperatives were established and became members of the ICA. And with this, in 1960, the ICA became for the first time a truly global organization and no longer one with the predominance of Europe and North America. Then a long period of 32 years followed between 1963 and 1995 to redefine the international cooperative standards, this time with a much better balance between the different regions of the world. This took place in 2 stages. The first stage took place between 1963 and 1966 with the restructuring of the list of cooperative principles and the formulation of the first 6 principles we have today, more or less, including the 6th principle of cooperation among cooperatives. The second stage was much longer and lasted between 1979 and 1995, beginning with the 1979 Laidlaw Report, which introduced the concept of sustainable development and of community in connection with cooperatives. This report was discussed and approved at the 1980 Moscow Cooperative Congress, still in the middle of the Cold War. Then a series of surveys with ICA members followed, and the finalized version of the Cooperative International Standards, the Statement on the Cooperative Identity, was approved at the ICS Centenary Congress in 1995 in Manchester, with the 7 cooperative principles of concern for the community, 10 underlying values, and a definition of cooperative. 5 years later, in the year 2000, the International Labour Organization, the ILO, put the cooperatives on the agenda of the 2001 and 2002 sessions of the International Labour Conference. The project was to negotiate and approve the first ever global recommendation on cooperatives, which meant also defining the cooperative principles. I had the privilege to take part in these negotiations, having been accredited by the Italian government, and I coordinated the small group of 10, 12 other delegates from the cooperative movement who had been accredited by their respective governments. Together, we introduced amendments and lobbied for these amendments within the negotiating committee, which comprised a few hundreds of persons, most of them external to the cooperative movement. After 2 years of efforts, from the preparatory work in 2000 and 2001, and through the intermediary work between the 2 sessions of June 2001 and June 2002, the ILO Recommendation 193 on the promotion of cooperatives was finally approved in June 2002 and achieved 2 key results, and both closely linked to the Universal Cooperative Standards, which had been approved internally by the cooperative movement 7 years earlier. First, all the contents of the Statement on the Cooperative Identity were incorporated in the recommendation with the definition, the 10 values, and all 7 principles. That wasn't at all obvious, because many delegates wanted to change them. And without the presence of us from the cooperative movement in the negotiation, it would probably have happened. And cherry on the cake, we even managed to have the Statement on the Cooperative Identity and the International Cooperative Alliance mentioned textually in the recommendation, which is a totally unique occurrence in the history of ILO texts. Secondly, these standards are considered in the recommendation as being the very basis which justifies the long list of policy proposals included in the recommendation, which then had a strong positive impact on national policy and legislation configuring and promoting cooperatives in dozens of countries in the following years. With the approval of ILO Recommendation 193, the whole international community actually approved the international cooperative standards for the first time in history. And these cooperative standards then became universal standards for the community of nations and for the whole UN system. ILO Recommendation 193 spurred an unprecedented wave of new policy frameworks and laws on cooperatives in dozens of countries, as I've just said. On the other hand, as soon as Recommendation 193 was approved, the worker-owned cooperative movement, so worker cooperatives and social cooperatives, coordinated by CICOPA, the sectoral organization of the ICA for this type of cooperatives, of which I was the Secretary General at that time, elaborated and approved the complementary standards for worker cooperatives and social cooperatives between 2002 and 2011. The recommendation has also had a tangible impact on the promotion of the wider social and solidarity economy, which the text of the recommendation already hints at. In 2013, the ILO and other UN agencies started recognizing formally the social and solidarity economy, which had already been approved and recognized in Europe and some other parts of the world. In 2022, the ILO negotiated and voted a resolution on the social and solidarity economy for the first time. I was in that negotiation too. And this resolution tentatively defines the wider economic space, which is called the social and solidarity economy, with characteristics which are strikingly similar to the universal cooperative standards, and which shows to what extent these universal cooperative standards are actually the main reference model for the wider social and solidarity economy. And indeed, the cooperative movement is the only part of the social and solidarity economy that has international standards. The following years, the UN General Assembly voted a resolution on the social and solidarity economy as well, and which reiterates those characteristics. In the meantime, between 2008 and 2013, a strong attempt was launched within the cooperative movement to modify the statement on the cooperative identity by proposing the addition of an eighth cooperative principle on the environment. This initiative was then aborted in 2013 on two grounds. It was recognized that the environmental issue is included in the 17th cooperative principle, which indeed mentions sustainable development. The new text would not have matched ILO Recommendation 193, approved a few years earlier, nor the successive UN texts referring to the ILO Recommendation 193 or the Statement on the Cooperative Identity, not to mention all the national cooperative laws that have been approved in dozens of countries since the approval of the recommendation. So as a result, in 2013, the ICA Articles of Association were modified by common consent to make it more difficult to change the Statement on the Cooperative Identity, for which, among other things, a World Cooperative Congress, which is an exceptional event in the international cooperative movement, has to be convened. And indeed, in 2019, the ICA General Assembly did approve to convene a Congress focusing precisely on the Statement on the Cooperative Identity. The 33rd World Cooperative Congress, called Deepening Our Cooperative Identity, was held at the end of 2021 in Seoul and online, still under the COVID-19 pandemic. And apart from a few isolated voices, virtually no participant requested a change in the Statement of the Cooperative Identity, although it was analyzed from 24 different angles during the Congress. This was confirmed in the official conclusions of the Congress. Instead, a strong conclusion of the Congress was to make much better use of this cooperative identity as it is formulated. This result actually corroborated a survey which the ICA had conducted almost 4 years earlier at the beginning of 2018, when I began as Director General of the ICA, and was the one with the highest level of participation in recent ICA history. There too, only isolated voices had requested a change in the Statement on the Cooperative Identity. An earlier ICA survey in 2006 had showed the same result. In spite of this apparently general consensus on maintaining the universal standards as they are and promoting them, there have been requests to launch a post-Congress survey on this topic. So upon request from an ICA working group that had been created just before the Congress, the ICA Global Office carried out a survey between April and October 2022, when I was still the DG of that organization. And the survey was done in 11 different languages and got responses from 136 countries, with 3 categories of respondents: representatives of cooperatives or cooperative organizations, individual cooperative members, and experts. The results were then analyzed by ICA staff that then included professional sociologists with a software called SPSS, among others. Overall, the result of the survey showed a strong adherence to the Statement on the Cooperative Identity, which was seen by a majority of respondents as fully expressing the nature and purpose of the cooperative enterprise model, while being sufficiently flexible to adapt to different environments and having stood the test of time. In turn, the responses highlighted the importance of promoting the Declaration on the Cooperative Identity more effectively. In March 2023, I ended my mandate as ICA Director General, and since then I haven't followed in detail the evolution of this initiative to discuss possible changes to the Statement on the Cooperative Identity, but this initiative is still going on. And so I would like to put a few questions for debate. As we know, the world's present situation is characterized by a lot of instability and uncertainty in this moment, probably more than between 2008 and 2013, when the previous attempt at changing the Statement on the Cooperative Identity took place. In this particularly sensitive environment, we should ponder on the possibility of any spillover effect in the event of changing the statement on the cooperative identity in this period. In particular, we should ask ourselves to what extent it will be a problem if a new set of cooperative universal standards was in contradiction with dozens of national laws that have been approved since the ILO Recommendation 193. Two, we should also ask ourselves whether there could be a problem with the fact that the worker-owned cooperative movement have elaborated and approved standards for worker cooperatives and social cooperatives that are complementary to the statement on the cooperative identity. If this statement is no longer in force or as such, or is modified, what happens? In other words, if the basis changes, what happens to the complements? And three, we should also ask ourselves whether the fact that the existing cooperative universal standards incorporated in the statement on the cooperative identity have now been approved by the community of nations and the UN system through the ILO Recommendation 193 changes the very nature of those cooperative universal standards or not. There is a large debate today about multilateralism in the UN system. Can the cooperative movement still consider the international cooperative standards as being exclusively its internal affair, as it was certainly the case before 2002? Or is it now also part of the international public domain under the UN system? And therefore, should any modification to these standards be coordinated with the UN system or not? Now, even if the cooperative universal standards are not modified for the time being, there are many, many things that can be done about them, like regular reports on the implementation of these standards, like the annual UN reports on human rights based on the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Two, explanatory documents, as it has already been done with the 2015 guidance notes on the cooperative principles, or the 2021 background document for the 33rd World Cooperative Congress, called Examining Our Cooperative Identity. Three, a large array of educational material could be elaborated. And four, a system of audit of how each cooperative complies with those standards could be implemented, like it is already the case in some countries, like in France, for example. It could even be imagined to put in place a system of cooperative certification. What is certain is that one, the gradual elaboration and approval of universal cooperative standards since the 17th century is a really unique accomplishment in the world's history and constitutes really a very precious asset for the cooperative movement. And two, the universal cooperative standards, as they are enshrined in the statement of the cooperative identity, have shown to be sufficiently general and flexible to allow for a high level of creativity within the cooperative movement, which continuously renews itself, reinvents itself, with the invention over the last decades of brand new types of cooperatives like the social cooperatives, the community cooperatives, or the platform cooperatives. In any case, coming back to our book, Cooperativism at Work, the 26 case studies, as I said, do confirm that the worker owners in all those cooperatives in 15 countries naturally abide by the universal cooperative standards and really identify with them. If you have any comment, do not hesitate to write it below in the space left for comments. Thank you very much.